No? Oh, hello. Hi, everyone. I'm Clara. I'm happy to be here today to speak about sensing what's possible. Oh, I think this is sitting correct. So today I would like to speak about sensing what's possible, or more specifically, how can we use digital platforms to engage citizens in the design of urban futures. Meaning sensing what's possible through digitally led engagement and storytelling. Today I'm going to speak a bit, I'm working at Gehl Architects in Copenhagen, so I'm going to speak a bit about how we work with digital layers at Gehl, and then more specifically how we're working with digital engagement and storytelling. And then I'm going to bring two cases, is this like, okay, and then I'm going to bring two cases that I worked on recently, which are working specifically with digital engagement and storytelling. So if we zoom out for a bit to begin with, I work at Gehl Architects, which is an urban planning and consultancy company in Copenhagen. Our methods and the way we work is based on Jan Gehl's work that is more than 50 years old. Jan Gehl, we come from this very human-centered tradition where Jan Gehl sort of put the people into urban planning that was traditionally very much based around the buildings. But Jan was very interested in the life between the buildings and how people use these spaces. Yes, so that is, and he said this thing, we measure what we care about, and that is a statement that very much carries into the work that we do today at Gehl. And what does that even mean? When we measure what we care about, we want to understand the different layers of public space and the relationship between public life, public space, and people's experiences. Meaning, when we talk about public life, we want to observe the people who are moving through or staying in a specific space and what they are doing. And when we talk about public space, we observe the spatial conditions of the place and what are the things that are enabling or disencouraging certain behaviors in that place and the qualities of it. And lastly, when we look at people's experiences, it's more at an eye level and the subjective experience of the individual and how they experience a certain place. What are the stories, the belonging, the dreams and hopes for a certain place, and what are the memories associated with that place. And the way we go about understanding these different things when we work in an urban context is that we use a suite of different methods that we call the Gehl lens to understand people's lived experience of the city. So we use different methods such as geospatial mapping, public life observations, urban quality analysis, sentiment analysis. We do focus groups, we layer data, do intercept surveys, and many other things. To start to understand what the hidden layers of the city are and try to make them visible so we can make actionable change. Because once we sense something, we can inform what kind of actions we want to take moving forward by making change. And I want to bring like a very simple and classic Gehl example of how this works in practice. This is Times Square, which is a project we did some years ago, where we were tasked to study the mobility of the place. And by looking at the distribution among pedestrians and motorized vehicles and looking at how they took up space, we could start to understand how the space was unequally distributed and sort of make the case for actually changing how this square was designed. So by making these layers visible, we could make the case for actually changing the place and make more space for pedestrians to spend time. And as we can see in these future pictures, it actually was quite successful. So I think I'm bringing this quick example is a very good case of how making these layers of data visible can inform how we want to change the future. And Gehl has always had this data-informed approach to working with public spaces. But these examples that I showed before were maybe very much quantitative. They are focused around public space and public life and are very professional, observational approaches. Where moving forward, we're also very interested in understanding the more qualitative qualities of public spaces. which is these like people's lived experiences, and that is what we're very interested in the research and development team, is how do we become more participatory? Not that participation and citizen engagement is anything new, but we are interested in how we can use digital technologies to make it easier and more accessible, and something we can do at a larger scale. Because in order to understand more complex topics, we need to make room for more qualitative data to inform our approach, even though that these stories can be perhaps a little more ambiguous and intangible and complex and hard to understand, and no one story is going to be the same. They're all going to be different. That doesn't mean it is not important to understand how each one of us feel in the city. So this is what I'm going to focus on moving forward in this presentation, how we're using both storytelling and different digital tools to engage and tell people stories and make them sensible to others, so they can inform how we take action and make changes in the cities based on people's subjective experiences. So the first case that I want to share is a project called In Over Charlotte, which is a project we did in Charlotte in the US, where we were tasked to study the emotional experience of the city, or more specifically, this concept of awe, which is like this very ambiguous grandeur emotion of feeling something that's much larger than yourself. And this was like a very open and ambiguous task that the client was not really very specific about what they wanted. So we had very free roam, which was super interesting, to try out some new methods. And what we set out to do was we partnered with a group of young locals, started to ask how do they experience the city. And we used a tool that we have that's called iLevel City, which is a photo voice app where these young people would photograph their everyday life and where they went, and answer different questions and annotate these images with how these places would make them feel, what was the vibe they perceived in these different public spaces, and so on, and tell their stories. And then when we had gathered all this data, we then gathered all the young people in both physical and online workshops where we would co-analyze the data together with the young people to generate insights together with them. And also have very meaningful workshops where we will record the sessions and also do sentiment analysis on the workshops to understand even more what are the emotional nuances of the topics that people are talking about in the workshops. So after doing all these workshops, I think we engaged around 40 young people. We had so many different nuances and insights, and a really big task was how do we then make these insights tangible or something that people can understand, because it's not just a dot on a map. And a big part of that was storytelling, because we wanted not just to hand over a report to the client, but also find a way to actually give back to the young people that we participated and let their voices be heard at a much larger scale, so they could potentially make other people more sensible towards their experience of the city, and maybe even inform decision makers at a larger scale. So we developed this cute little character called Charlotte, named after the city, who is meant to embody all of the participants who engaged in our process. And we showcase how Charlotte feels many different emotions going through the city. She feels calm when she's in nature. And she feels stressed when she's near big roads. And sometimes she even feels nostalgic. So we're trying to unpack all of these nuances of these young people in this fun, playful, and engaging storytelling website. And here are some more images, and we also used different quotes that we coupled with this sentiment analysis to add some more nuance and not show the quotes just as they are, but also add some layers of interpretation to them. And overall, yeah. And the second case that I want to share is Celebrate Medina, which in many cases is very different from Charlotte. So Medina is a city in Saudi Arabia. It's a very different cultural and social context than here in the north and just even the US. So a big part of that was even how do we even start engaging with people in this context, and who are we even going to talk to, and how are we going to make them talk to us. So in that sense, it was the other way around, where storytelling was a part of just making the case for citizen engagement and starting to speak the same language with both the client and the citizens. Why is it important to talk to people? What does it mean? What are we going to use people's information to? Like, why would I want to tell you my story and give my data up to you? It's a super personal thing. So there's a whole other social dynamic in that context. So we're using storytelling to sort of speak the same language and build the trust. And there was a lot of, in the engagement process, building trust with the citizens and saying that we want to celebrate the things that you love about the city and not tear down the things that you love. So your stories are going to have a positive change, hopefully. But when we did get to do participation, we did a series of different digital engagement methods on different levels. We used eye-level city again, which is more of this eye-level approach where we engaged a group of young females who photographed their whereabouts in Medina. They showed us where they went, how they filled different places, where did they feel like they belonged, where didn't they belong, and what urban qualities were informing their experience in those certain places. And then again, we did a hands-on workshop with all these young women, looking at the images and giving them a chance to put meaning to how we perceive their data, and give feedback to our interpretation and give their own interpretation to all the images. And then on a more high level, we also did this Celebrate Medina campaign, which was a public website that was accessible for everyone or anyone to go on and share their favorite place in Medina, tell their stories, share images and so on. And I think what is really interesting about these different engagement methods that we did in Medina was that we also did a lot of the more classic Gehl methods in Medina, such as public life studies and public space studies, which is much more observational. But in these studies, where we observed over 70,000 people, we didn't see many women in public spaces, and even less young females as the ones we engaged in Eye-Level City. But that didn't necessarily mean that young women don't spend time in public space. But when we started to actually talk to them, we could understand why they didn't go to the places that we observed, and where they would like to go, and what sort of like repelled them from the places that we didn't see them. And another thing was also, how can we localize our methods of studying public spaces to the context of Medina, where different things, like the things that we usually study and look at, are maybe not the same things that they find important, where this is a city where most of the year you can't spend time outside during daytime because it's simply too hot, so most of the life happens at night. So that's why lighting suddenly becomes a huge important thing to the urban quality of a place. So I think what's interesting about this case is how the both more observational quantitative methods are sort of complemented by the qualitative participatory methods and strengthening each other. Yeah. So I want to sort of end off by saying, by listening better and making people's stories sensible to others, we can unveil more layers to the urban experience and in turn create cities that are more in tune with the human experience. And when individuals feel cared for by the city and they feel like they are reflected in the city, it can have positive impact on a larger scale. So even though these participatory methods may show one subjective perspective of one person, even if we can make that one person feel great and go out and do something positive in their community and have ripple effects that can impact the city at a larger scale. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Clara. That was very interesting. What I can keep was qualitative and quantitative data, and how a sense of belonging can give reciprocation to other people. If someone is heard, then they might feel that they can give back to other people or to their city.